Hello, I'm Mario Thomas, and welcome back to Making Civics Matter. Today's lesson is about forms and systems of government, Standard 3.1 and 3.2. Here are the question answers to Standard 2.2, last week's video, obligations and responsibilities of U.S. citizens. I'm an 18-year-old male and I have autism, a mental disability. What American duties am I exempt from? If you're 18 years old and you have a mental disability, you are exempt from attending school and defending the nation at war. I am a 37-year-old male with no disabilities. What American duties am I exempt from? If you are a 37-year-old male with no disabilities, you are exempt from attending school. Is voting a responsibility or a duty? Voting is a responsibility. Do females have to register for selective service? No. Here's the vocabulary for Standard 3.1 and 3.2. Parliament means the lawmaking body of a parliamentary government. Federal government means a group of states with a central government. Confederal government means a loose association of states. A unitary government is a state governed as a single power in which the central government is ultimately supreme. A presidential government is a government that has a president. A parliamentary government is a government that has most of this governmental power in a cabinet called a parliament. A monarch is a person such as a king or queen who reigns over a kingdom or empire who in most cases inherits power. Dictator means a person who rules with complete and absolute power. A democracy means that the people of a nation either rule directly or they elect officials who act on their behalf. Direct democracy means all voters in a community meet in one place to decide on policies and laws. Representative democracy means the people elect representatives to carry on the work of the government for them, often referred to as a republic. An electoral college is a body of people that represent a country who cast a vote directly for the president of the country in which they represent. Tyranny means cruel or oppressive government rule. Here are the systems of government. There are 5 systems of government. They are parliamentary. An example of parliamentary is England. Federal. An example of federal is the United States. Confederal. An example of confederal is Canada. Unitary. An example of unitary is France. Presidential. An example of presidential is Mexico. Here is the parliamentary government. In a parliamentary government, most governmental power is vested in a parliament. The parliament may be bicameral just as the Congress in the United States is. In these types of government, half of the parliament is chosen by the people of the country, while the other half is chosen by the executive branch. In a parliamentary form of government, there's a prime minister. The prime minister is chosen by the majority party in the parliament, and the prime minister is the head of government. The head of state is usually a monarch or a president. Here is the federal government. The federal government, the power is divided between the national and state governments. They share equal amounts of power. This indicates that local governments have no independent power. The 3 branches of government in the federal system of government is the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. An example of a federal government is the United States. Here is the Confederal Government. In a confederal government, there is something known as a loose association rather than a firm union. Each state has equal powers, but has much more power than the central or national government. These states are very loosely associated because they are afraid of having a strong central government in fear of their limited freedom or power. An example of a confederal government is Canada. Here is a unitary state. A unitary system of government, the central or national government is supreme to all state and local governments. The state and local governments only exercise powers given to them by the central government. An example of a unitary state is France. Here is the presidential system of government. In a presidential system of government, an individual leads an executive branch separate from the legislative branch. Citizens vote for the legislative branch and executive branch in a presidential system. Most countries that have a presidential system elect president by popular vote from citizens. Some countries elect president by electoral college. The presidential system usually clashes with other systems of government. For example, in the United States, the systems of government are the federal and presidential government. An example of a presidential government is Mexico. Here are the forms of government. There are 6 forms of government. They are democracy. An example of a democracy is the United States. Another example of a democracy is Switzerland. Oligarchy. An example of oligarchy is Zanzibar. Autocracy. An example of autocracy is North Korea. And another example of autocracy is Saudi Arabia. Theocracy. An example of a theocracy is Iran. Monarchy. An example of a monarchy is the United Kingdom. Another example of a monarchy is Saudi Arabia. And anarchy. There are no current anarchies in the world. Here is democracy. There are 2 types of democracies: direct democracies and representative democracies. In a direct democracy, citizens directly decide policies and laws. An example of a direct democracy is Switzerland. In a representative democracy, citizens vote for representatives to decide on policies for them. An example of a representative democracy is the United States. Oligarchy. Oligarchy is a form of government where powers are given to a small group of people. These small amount of people usually differ from citizens by either wealth, nobility, education, corporate, religious, political, or military reasons. Oligarchies have been historically tyrannical. One-party states or countries with only one political party are considered an oligarchy because it is ruled by one group of people. An example of a oligarchy is Zanzibar. An example of a one-party state is China. Here is an autocracy. As a democracy, there are 2 types of autocracies: an absolute monarchy and a dictatorship. In an absolute monarchy, a single monarch has absolute power and is ultimately supreme. Absolute monarchies are usually hereditary monarchies, which means monarchs inherit power. An example of an absolute monarchy is Saudi Arabia. In a dictatorship, like an absolute monarchy, is ruled by one person and has absolute power, but a dictator comes to power when citizens of a country is rebelling against the government. An example of a dictatorship is North Korea. Here is theocracy. In a theocracy, religious officials, usually a priest or priests, rule the government with religious principles or in the name of God. Theocracy fundamentally means the rule of God. An example of a theocracy is Iran and the rule of Islam. Here is monarchy. As autocracies and democracies, there are two types of monarchies. Those two monarchies are absolute monarchies and constitutional monarchies. Since I have already spoken about absolute monarchies, we are going to go to constitutional monarchies. In a constitutional monarchy, the head of state is a monarch. The monarchs are limited by a constitution to prevent tyranny or autocracy. Governmental powers are shared between the monarch and an organized government, like, for example, the Danish Parliament. An example of a constitutional monarchy is the United Kingdom or Britain. Here is anarchy. Anarchy is a state of having no government or authorities. If the country has no government and no authorities, such as police, that country is considered an anarchy. There are no anarchies currently on the globe, but Spain was an anarchy from 1936 to 1939. Here are questions. If a citizen is voting for a representative, that is usually which form of government? If a local government has very limited powers, what system of government is this? If power is shared between the federal and state or local governments, what system of government is this? If my country has no laws, no constitution, and no leader, what does that mean? If my country is limited by a constitution and my current leader inherited her power, what form of government does my country have? Here are the socials of MCM. Make sure to share with your friends and subscribe